IIMA webinar series. I am Professor Sanjay Verma from IIM Ahmedabad. I am your host for today's talk. Today we have Steve Clifford, who is CEO of ComSol Associates, with us, who would be sharing his learning with us. Before that, I would just take you through certain necessary information about the talks that we are holding regularly. These talks are being conducted regularly. Saturday 4 p.m. is the preferred time. You may note this time in your calendars. Please feel free to share the invites with your friends and colleagues. There is no limit on who can attend. There is no fee, no charges. The webinars are attended by people who have intellectual and academic interest, those who want to learn, and therefore there are no certificates for attending these webinars. These talks are telecasted live on Facebook also. Usually we also used to do on YouTube, but there is some connectivity problem that's coming with YouTube. Today we are on Facebook. We have access to 300 users on Zoom. Rest will come on Facebook. The views and opinions expressed are those of the speaker and not of IIM Ahmedabad per se. You may ask questions on Facebook also. I am your host. I will read the questions on Zoom as well as Facebook and ask Steve on your behalf, on the behalf of audience. Question and answer will be at the end of the talk. In between the talk, please do not interrupt the speaker. Let him speak. And once he is done with his talk, we can ask all the questions. Also, now let me take this opportunity to welcome Steve amongst all of us. Steve, good afternoon from India and a warm welcome to you.
Thank you, Professor. Good afternoon to you and good morning from London.
Good morning from London. Good afternoon from India. Thanks for coming, Steve. Let me give a very small introduction about you, Steve. Dear friends, Steve has been working in the financial services industry for over 30 years. His most recent role was that of Managing Director and Global Head of Business Change for JP Morgan Investment Management and JP Morgan International Private Bank. He's a dynamic, versatile, and commercially led senior business leader and change manager with diverse experience across financial services, corporate, investment, and international business environments. Steve is known for delivering transformational leadership through effective collaboration and partnership, engaging with stakeholders at C-level, board, and third parties, delivering fit-for-purpose operations and business change. Hugely successful at translating business requirements into tangible, realistic program deliverables and outcomes, delivering positive change of real quality and value, helping businesses meet commercial goals with an excellent track record in designing and executing effective business strategies, vision, and roadmap. In addition to what I have talked about Steve, there is a lot of other things to talk about him. For example, he is an avid golfer. He loves golfing. He also likes boating. He has done boating on the canals of England. He likes to travel a lot. He loves working across different cultures and enjoys spending time with his 4 kids. He is also interested in pets like I am. He breeds beagles. He's also a collector of antiques, and he stays in a 500 years old house that was built during the reign of Henry VIII. So Steve, it's wonderful knowing about so many different dimensions of yours. Once again, thank you for taking this opportunity and coming to us. It's all yours, Steve. Please share your learnings with us. Thank you and warm welcome, Steve.
Thank you very much, Professor, for that warm and generous introduction. It's quite interesting when it's played back to you about things that you like and you don't like, and realize a house is 500 years old and it takes a lot of upkeep. So, you know, it's one of those lovely things to have, but it needs treasuring. Good afternoon, everybody from London. First and foremostly, thank you for joining this webinar this afternoon. most importantly, I hope you're all staying well and safe during these difficult times and unprecedented times that we're going through right now with COVID-19 and the challenges that brings both to family and to businesses. It's and I'll allude to that a little bit during this presentation in the next 45 minutes or so. So thank you very much for accepting me today. Okay, I'm going to talk to you about a little bit about business strategy versus implementation strategy. Why are they the same and why are they different? I think there's two parts to this really, and if we look at the strategy definition, that I thought, well, it's good to start with a definition. A plan of action designed to achieve long-term or overall aim. Okay, I have to source that as Google, but in the views of the world, strategy is a very interesting thing, and in its most, it's the used word or abused word in corporate boardrooms, in businesses, but nevertheless a critical one that helps management steer things and move things forward. A lot of people talk about strategy. You could have local strategies, you could have global strategies, you could have interim strategies, but ultimately, let's have a look at what that means. But if you look at it, we can put 99 reasons for success in any project plan or strategy, but one thing determines how well a strategy is made real, and that is around governance, it's around knowledge, it's around understanding what the client or what you're trying to achieve. And it was very much reminded to me in my career over the years. It's been said many a time, and I say it myself, is that you can have the best strategies and ideas in the world. You can sit there and say, right, you know, this is where I want my business to be, this is where I want to achieve. But if you do not have excellence in execution of that strategy, it means nothing. It's just words. And this is what I want to talk about today, very much in about executing a strategy, taking the ideas, taking what the direction of the company wants, look at what it's trying to achieve, look at what you're trying to achieve, and making that real. We call it in Europe where the rubber hits the road, i.e. where we turn a concept into, or ideation into a business case, if you like, and then look at how we make that happen. And that's done in a number of areas. And on this slide here, which we've put together, it's all about understanding change and change management. So if we look at the top bullet point, the human nature by default, as studies have been conducted this over many, many years, is 80% of the human psyche does not like change. So you're already starting from a position of people are comfortable with what they're doing. So from my perspective, it's really, really important when you're taking a strategy and turning it into implementation and understanding what that implementation looks like, that you have experts in change management, execution and delivery. People know how to take a business idea, to put it down in paper, to make it real, to make it, you can feel it and touch it. In many worlds, and especially in my world in financial services, executives will turn around and say, well, that's easy, Steve. It's like flicking a switch. But you know, as an executive, you would expect that and you want that. They don't necessarily want to know what's going on behind the scenes in making change happen. But that doesn't mean you release yourself from your responsibilities. It doesn't mean that you release yourself from your governance and your project plans and how you manage that. That goes hand in hand. You just don't need to talk about it. You know, I've been told in my career over many times that, you know, don't send me a PowerPoint presentation, tell me how good you are. I know that. I want you to tell me what my issues are, right? Don't try and prove to me how good you are. I'm not interested. The interest is in, we're driving a project forward, you have the skills, and you make me feel comfortable with that. To do that, you have to have the right team with the relevant experience and who will provide an immediate impact. You don't want to be sitting there thinking to yourselves when you're trying to execute a strategic change that you need 6 months to think about it. In the dynamic world of financial services that I work in, and most corporate sectors that we've also been touched in, whether that's government, construction, health service, or whatever it may be, people, when they hire you and want you to work, they want you to make an immediate impact. And also, at the end of the day, that impact is not about what you've done before and just trying to force it into a new business. It's much more trying to force understanding what that business needs and adopting your skills and your knowledge to do that. Understanding the challenges. So many people, when we talk about strategy, when we talk about ultimately executing that, is the first thing people say to me, if you unwind failed projects, unwind failed deliveries, the sponsors will say, he didn't really understand it. She didn't really understand it. Yes, she understood that I wanted, or he understood that I wanted to deliver technology, but they didn't understand the regulation. They didn't understand what it took from a global point of view or a local point of view. So really understanding your client needs, and in pitches that I've been in, I talk about it all the time. Understand the client is where it stands. If you do not understand your client, you're going to be working at different bases and different assumptions. And that sets on to the second point about saying here about understanding your client needs, and to build your plans around their plans. And what I mean by that is that company or that organization will have their own views on how they want to get things done. They'll have many more objectives than the work you're necessarily doing with them on your own or with a team. It will be one of many, 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 many. So you need to make sure that you incorporate and understand the bigger picture, understand the goals that they're trying to achieve, and legislate for that, should I say, in how you build your own plans to show that you understand their business. It's so important that people feel that you understand them. It's beyond that, it goes into the world of stakeholder management. We say here, keep feeding the bears. What do we mean by that is, your stakeholders, you'll think, if you look in your little world of spheres of influence when you're doing change or trying to do your execution, is that you will look at and say, well, I have a sponsor and I have a team of experts that I can use to the business, but they're not necessarily people you need to keep managing all the time. You have a ring of stakeholders that you may not actually see or feel, but you may have a CFO who is interested in how much money you're spending. You may have a head of product who is very interested in your technology, or a CTO that may not necessarily be in your project or how you're executing that strategy, but you've got to keep informing them. Failure to communicate is a failure of a program. I talk about at ComSol under my heading that was on the first slide anyway. My slogan or logo is leadership, relationships, and delivery. What do I mean by that? Is if you don't show the leadership, you don't build the deliveries, relationships, how can you possibly deliver? And in my world of when I was previously at JP Morgan, before I set up my own business, my team were measured on all those three buckets. If you're not showing leadership, you're not showing delivery, relationships, how can you possibly deliver? And therefore, when you look at how well you're doing as a career, you need to make sure all those buckets are hit, because if you're in a change aspects, I mentioned it just now, everything is tailored to each business and their needs. Yes, you may have a client that will want a technology, and I've seen this firsthand in London and across Europe, where a technology was suggested. It was, as we say in English, cookie cut into another organization, and it failed because it's not a one size doesn't fit all. It doesn't. It's all about, some companies may want to, in an analogy, a Rolls Royce, and in another company may not want a Rolls Royce. It may just want a Mini. So from that perspective, it isn't necessarily the biggest is always best, and it doesn't mean the most expensive is always the best. It's a game about understanding client and building that and being prepared to say to your clients from a strategic point of view, where this is strategic implementation comes into play, you just say, I know you wanted a Rolls Royce as an example. However, in this scenario, you don't need it. And this is why, from my experience and my great team on how you achieve that to get better value for money and a better result for your business. But by the way, you will still achieve your strategic goal. So one size definitely doesn't fit all. Change methodologies. I'm not going to talk too much about that, in as long as there's a methodology after methodology around the world. Books are written on it. Roles are written on it. But you do need a toolkit that actually serves a purpose in helping you change. My experience on that for 30 years in this, where we talk about the experience bag, and I'll come to that in a sec, is I don't find that any one change methodology, whether that be Prince, Agile, Waterfall, Lean, Six Sigma, any of those stuff that you may have heard of or may have referred to or are learning about, it doesn't necessarily mean it works in every case. You need to learn to adapt and be fungible with your methodologies. So when I look at my experiences and when I'm looking to what I've learned is that everybody is an individual. You need to know your executives, you need to know the people you're working on, and you need to be able to adapt your style to who you're talking to. So, but at the end of the day, in most 99% of the industries around the world that are worked in, whether it's financial services, construction, any health working, whatever, the holiday industry, tourism industry, it's a people industry. And I can only reinforce to you today the importance of people in everything we do. If we don't manage the people, we do not understand what makes you work well and not work well, and we don't understand what your challenges are and non-challenges are, we can expect people to get frustrated, you expect turnover and move on. But the important thing is you need these people to do a job for you and with you. No team is an individual. A team is a collection of people who will get to a common goal. So from that, when you've got those base rules set in place, and then you're working from high on principles, absolutely, in my career, there is no compromise on integrity. Absolutely none. No, respect, integrity, trust are the basis of doing business. We have seen too many examples throughout the world, from India to United States, from UK to Australia, where we've seen integrity fall apart. We have examples of it, and you'll see where regulation comes into play, governments come into play to try and change that. So integrity is absolutely fundamental to me. The power of networking. You don't know everything yourself, and I'll talk about collaboration as we move forward on this. You do not know everything yourself, but at the end of the day, what you do know is other people. And if you don't know other people, get to know other people. It's really important. What they do, how they operate, whether they're at a competitor or whether they're a partner, it doesn't matter. Everybody has a shared set of objectives. Everybody has a shared set of challenges, maybe in different pictures, but ultimately everybody works with challenges every day. Understanding people, knowing that you're a trusted partner, understanding who to go to when when you don't know the answer yourself is very, very important. And also, finally, on the third point, what I have learned is approach is as critical as much as the idea. Many people, in my experience, when I was head of change and running my business now and working through JP Morgan and other organizations over the years, is I've seen people turn up to me with 50, 60, 70 page PowerPoint decks, and I'll look at it and say, I really don't know what you're talking to me about. This is too confusing. It's too hard. What are you actually going to do? So about keeping it simple, saying what you're going to do, keeping to a certain set of structures around, well, we're going to build a business case. We're going to tell you how much money it is. We're going to tell you how many people we need. We're going to tell you how long it is. We will do a pilot. We will implement. We will understand the business. So people see it very simply, very straightforward and not complicated is very, very important. So approach to all of that is critical. Because the idea can get lost in what we will say over here in London as over-engineering. It's been made too complicated. So if you take principles to any long-term relationships and business endeavors, what I learned in my career and what I'm trying to continue to put into practice and the COMSOL here is I've learned a number of elements that help me to be successful and help my teams to be successful and help organizations to be successful. Relationships, I've mentioned that already. Partner with our clients as though we're part of the organization. Less of them than anybody else. They want you to know that you're their priority. They want you to know at the end of the day that you care for them more than anybody else. How you manage that behind the doors of that client is up to you, but they should not be impacted in conversations such as, sorry, I didn't get that to you today because I was speaking to JP Morgan and I know you're BlackRock. Sorry, BlackRock, I didn't talk to you. It will just not work. People will just say, well, he doesn't care. We'll move on to the next person. So, and understanding that that client feels that you're an extension of their organization, that you care that much about it as if you were part of their team, I've learned over the years is a massive importance, because people feel very comfortable about that. When you put the human emotion into it, you want to know that you're in a safe pair of hands and feeling strong about what you do. Integrity, I've talked about integrity. Always act with honesty and integrity. If you lie, you will get found out. No doubt, you will get found out. And then your reputation, your brand is done. It's not good when you're making change and working with clients, or as a client spending money where somebody's being dishonest with you. If you're dishonest, the trust is gone. When the trust is gone, the relationship is gone. And then that is the end of that. Client centricity, client centric. Always put the client first. No matter how much you may feel they're right or wrong, no matter how much they shout and scream, they're always right. It's their business. They're paying the bill. You know, they want to understand at the end of the day that you're hearing them, and that you're making time for them, and that you're putting their operating model first and foremost over your principles of what you think you can bring to the table. And that's why it's so important to adapt and be flexible in what you're doing. But always be conscious, as the title of this webinar talks about, beware of the business strategy. Do not lose sight of it. But when you come that into implementation, strategy and execution, you have to be able to have those skills to be able to negotiate with the client, to still get them their end result, but it may be done differently. And by having those great relationships, knowing that you have got their 100% attention, knowing that you're putting them first, will help those conversations, because you become a trusted partner. Trust is so important. Simplicity, to always make things as simple and as uncomplicated as possible. I would say at the end of
Steve, you are on mute. Can you unmute yourself, please?
I've gone on mute. Sorry, I've gone on mute. Sorry.
Yeah, now it's fine.
So I was just talking about simplicity. I would say always make things as simple and as complicated as possible, because nobody wants to deal with complicated stuff. Most importantly, when you're working and executing change, it's a busy enough job as to do. Change is in addition to what you normally do as a day job. So it's very, very important that when you present things, when you explain things, and how you work with the businesses and your own career, you keep it as uncomplicated and as straightforward as possible. You know, everybody wants to have things presented to them that is easy. Nobody wants to work harder than they have to do on something when they already have a day job to manage as it stands. Intellectual property, very, very important. In my industry, in financial services, where my company is hired and others like my company are hired to come in to hit the road running, as they say, because we have the experience, we have the leadership skills, we have the knowledge, but we also need to make sure that we impart that knowledge with the client when you leave, because we will do a change and then we walk away, but those clients will carry on with that change. And it's very important that the training is done, the staff are understood, the staff are clear, the technology is smooth, and making sure that knowledge transfer is done properly and with respect, so you can walk away from doing that implementation strategy and execution saying, we've done a great job. And the best way to check that as a point of test is to quite honestly ask the client and say, how do you feel? Is there anything more you need of, or anything less? And make sure that that is signed out appropriately, and the client fully understands that that knowledge that they hired you to bring in is not lost, because you've left it with them to the greatest extent that it's relevant to them. And what I mean by that, I'm not necessarily going to talk about core project principles when the change was doing an example of changing a bank's brand or something like that. We would talk very much about what it's taken to do the brand and what they need to do, but we don't necessarily need to leave them the processes unless they want to, and we'll be fine with that. So it's very much about leaving knowledge with clients and not feeling that it's taken away and then reused somewhere else. Or most importantly, where we take the information from the client, recycle that and go and sell it elsewhere. That is a very bad mistake. Networks, I've mentioned about this earlier. Avoid doing everything by yourself. As a company, and what I've learned over the years, you don't know everything. You never will. But if you know where to go, that is a great place to be. I used to say, and I still say, I used to say to clients, 80% of the time, 90% of the time, we get it right. But that 10, 20% where we don't get it right, I give you one guarantee to that, is which I'll find out. And I'll find out for you, and we'll put it right, and we will help you do it. I can only do that if I have a network. And what has come in this industry, as much as it applies to many other industries, is that sometimes you have to find people outside of your normal comfort zone or what you do as a job, who are very specialist in what they do. And I've named some examples here. The very deep subject matter expertise on cyber security, big data, blockchain, client money, regulation, financial crime, where we as change agents and strategists can very much talk about that. But sometimes you may ask for, or for example, the professor may ask for, saying, I want some deep level understanding of board level strategies. So, we know people who do that for a living and do that for a job. So being able to bring those networks out and being able to know who to go to is extremely useful. It's extremely handy. And I would certainly say to you, build out your networks, understand who does what, because from my perspective, it works. People respect it. Clients respect it because you're not claiming to know everything. So it builds an element of trust and integrity, back to those two key points I was talking about earlier, in knowing that you have that relationship with the client. My principles to that are: build a relationship with a client, build a relationship with your own organization, build that trust, and look for that long-term partnership rather than do a quick job, earn a quick buck and get out. I believe you're going to work with a client, you need to fully understand them, and only by understanding them can you really then do a really, really great job for them. So build out your networks is what I would certainly say. So implementation change is very different to business strategy, as I've already alluded to. You've got to be able to, as I said, take out the solution design. You've got to be able to understand where that strategy's come from, put together the project execution and knowledge, and know where to go for advice, knowledge, and research. So to give an example, where I have worked on ideas in my world, solution design is very much looking at helping the client with a number of services about, so you have your strategy, so here are your options, this is in our experience how we could put it together, and by the way, the yellow button is not the answer in your strategy document, it's actually the red button, so let me tell you why it's the red button, but it will still get you to the same place. Project execution and support, tailored delivery approach to clients, understanding exactly what they need. There, as I've mentioned earlier, there are many project methodologies out there. You can make sure at the end of the day, you tailor that to how the client operates. They may have their own project methodologies. They may have a best-in-class approach that they want you to adapt and adopt, but that's also fine. So don't go in there and say, this is how you do it, and you do it this way, or we can't help you. That will not work. It's all about understanding that client. And of course, most importantly, advice, knowledge, and research. Coming in as independent people to help businesses, you have to be able to know where you can lean on advice, be able to give advice, having that broad base of expertise, having that network, doing our own research, doing webinars like this and talking to people like you and understanding what you see and what you think, and where the industry is going more broadly. That's both locally and globally. Coming to the table with ideas. We recently did for example, a research and questionnaire on client reporting in financial services industry to show that, do people care about it or not care about it? That was done, and Lucy, one of our team here at ComSol, wrote a white paper on that to the industry saying it's not like it used to be, and this is why, and this is what you're telling us. So being able to bring that advice and knowledge research to the table is extremely important, because that is part of your value. That is part of when you're doing implementation strategy. It's not just doing a project plan and saying we start at A and finish at B, and here's a nice Gantt chart with all the bars and the timelines that will tell you how to get there. It's not about that. That is fundamental, obviously, as part of your toolbox, but being able to understand the clients and bringing that knowledge and research and helping them design how they're going to execute, and with that project execution support is key. That's why, frankly, ComSol is called ComSol. Com for commercial, Sol for solution. But, and that's what we're trying to do. We understand the broader pictures of businesses. If you don't understand the broader picture, how can you possibly execute to the requirements of that business? Next one, Sid. Understanding and partnering is key. You will see this is a theme that runs through every single stage. Understand your stakeholders and their objectives. Focus on what matters to the client the most. What is the most things that they worry about? You understand that. But obtain buy-in and engage teams at all levels. Many experiences of mine. Yes, we work for a certain team doing change, but there are other teams it impacts. So from my perspective, it's very much around making sure that everybody who's impacted starts it end to end. Communication is key. In very significant large programs we've done over the years of delivery and change on a strategy, it's about engaging those teams that it doesn't even impact at all, because what we describe, or what I describe as noise management, is very difficult. If people start looking at a change negatively, it's very difficult to recover. So because people will think it's a bad thing, they won't be happy about it, they don't understand it, the communication is broken down. So engaging teams through lunchtime sessions or webinars, you can do all of that. You can just by, we call it management by walking about, sitting at people's desks. How are you? How do you feel? You heard about this change. How do you feel about life on it? All those sort of questions, and talking to the people in the teams is very important. Make them feel part of the process, not a consequence of a process. And ultimately, as I've mentioned before, communicate clearly. That's a given. I've talked about that. But ensuring satisfaction, knowledge transfer, support and training, and offering relevant outputs to relevant teams. And what I mean by that is, you don't show an architect diagram to a person in sales from technology, but what you may want to do is show an architect diagram to the chief technology officer. So from that perspective, what I'm trying to say is make your outputs relevant to the teams that you're feeding. Make sure that when you're doing implementation strategy versus a strategy, that it still remains relevant to the strategy and you don't go off course. And that governance will allow you to do that, which will ultimately ensure satisfaction, knowledge transfer, support and training. Now, with ComSol, just before I talk about global but local, we put into place an advisory board, which is basically a number of industry experts at C-suite that we know globally. So one's in Hong Kong, one's in Luxembourg, a couple are in London, one's in the US, that very much talk about that make sure that we are staying to our beliefs about integrity, respect, guidance, substance. And it also shows that, we genuinely believe what we say. So these are independent people who are check and balance us. And I just wanted to mention that because showing that also showing as a smaller company, not a big multinational corporation, that you are serious in what you do and you can evidence it is equally important. The importance of being global but local. This is a term that we've used for many, many years in my industry, respecting, especially if you work with multinational corporations or a corporation that's looking to become multinational, is you can work to your strategies and stresses of what you want to achieve at a top line or senior executive strategic level, but you've got to recognize that those strategies need to be executed differently locally, but whilst still achieving the same goal. There may be many, many reasons for that. It may be cultural, it may be regulatory, it may be financial, it may be socioeconomic, but ultimately at the end of the day, it's really, really important that no individual team locally, and that could be intra-India, it could be intra-United States, it could be intra-Europe, anywhere like that, but you're still achieving the common goal. I used to say to my teams in the US, 80% of the US's revenue, but in Europe and Asia, we have 80% of the complexity. Why is that? Many, many different countries, many, many different cultures, many, many different regulators, but ultimately being able to navigate that and work through that, and respecting that you're a global or want to leverage broader expertise, but also be local in what you do is very important. So here's some views on from a perspective that's been picked up over the years when it comes to India, and I wanted to talk about this as a relevant audience, to give you some views and thoughts. And they're only a perspective; they could be right or wrong, and happy to have the debate on it. But where we come from in India to me, and India to the financial services market, is a very, very important sector, both on its own growth as a country, but also where multinational corporations have choose to what we determine offshore or move larger scale elements of their businesses into India, whether that be in Pune, Hyderabad, Chennai, Mumbai, Bangalore, etc., etc. What we see is, we would like India, I would love to work, and this is why my team has come into India, to help people learn and understand what else is out there. It's a bit of, well, we don't know, so we don't know. It is, no, you are equally intelligent, equally respectful, equally smart. So we need to make sure, when bigger organizations come in, it's massively important that we make sure that we have the most right people in there locally. We respect that and all that good stuff. Short-term fixing is always a challenge. There is a very primary driver about showing and demonstrating costs, but sometimes you have to increase cost to decrease cost, and that means investment and looking for the longer term. There's a saying that I use is prevention is better than cure. So let's look at what can be balanced out in the short term and balanced out in the long term. But not everything is about saving cost. It's also about efficiency, client service. It's also about being able to demonstrate that you're operating a very solid business in how you're operating. But not always looking for the short-term fix to save costs is necessarily the answer. It's been something that's been driven, I know that. But what I'm saying here, in my experience, is I'd like to show that back to you to say it's just not all about that. Structural issues, platform weaknesses, how operating models are working, handovers when offshores happen from, I don't know, Luxembourg to India or US to India or wherever it may be. These things are often thrown back to you in India and say, well done, carry on, crack on with that, and good luck. And things break, and then it's your fault, which is just not right. What is right is doing things properly, and what is right is about making sure that elements that are passed across, weaknesses in platforms, you have a voice, you have seniority, you're a peer group, you should say, and do not feel that you are deferential to anybody else at all. Never. It's wrong. You're an equal partner. To my world, and I can quote from my last company, where there's been a habit of putting senior managing directors of an American firm into India, into Hong Kong, into China. I fundamentally didn't believe that, and I'm one of many people who didn't believe that. They put local managing directors who understand the local business, put them in the organization locally to run it. You don't need an American who doesn't understand, frankly, where you are, to be trying to run a business that he doesn't frankly understand in a different environment and a different culture. So, and that's where peerage and respect and conduct all come into play. Don't over politicize, don't make it difficult. It can be very difficult sometimes. When we've asked on challenges, it's like it's his fault or it's her fault, and it's like when we're not looking for blame and culture and a blame culture, we're looking for honesty and integrity. So always feel strong about what you're doing. Always have your self-belief and have those conversations in confidence. Training, got to focus on training. There's annual training, annual refreshes, there's specific training, there's individual, there's coaching, there's management. Don't lose sight of it. The world is moving too fast, and I'll come on to that statement in a minute. So from my point of view, collaborate and grow together, leverage on expertise, strengths and confidence, knowledge share and execute. Think global but play domestic. You have a domestic market, do not lose sight of it. Ideate, innovate and implement jointly. Simple saying, we win together, we lose together. But ultimately, at the end of the day, mature markets, business management principles need to be applied in wide areas of service sector, including banking, financial services, technology and supply chain. This is not a delegation of simple tasks to a cheaper center that was perhaps viewed 15, 20 years ago. This is working with a partner on an effective cost base with effective people, with effective views that will collaborate and make the journey of the ultimate strategy better, smoother and faster than perhaps it should have been before. I wanted to share this with you very quickly. I'm conscious of time, but this is a great quote. And this is where I think it's very relevant to share with you. In, as it says at the bottom, life post-COVID is going to be very different, and we have to adapt. Now, Alan was an American writer, futurist, and business guy, going back to the 70s and 80s, or Alvin. And it basically goes on to say about the illiterate of the 21st century will not be those who cannot read and write, but those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn. Now, I wanted to share that with you because it's so important. You know, what we were doing this time last year in a non-COVID world, with situations of a global pandemic, having to work from home like we're all doing now, having to get used to that webinars don't always work, or your WebEx is breaking up, and how do I get decisions made are all going to be different. And there is an element here that what you perhaps knew before, you're going to have to perhaps leave behind. And if you don't do that, you will become part of the pre-2020 history as long as with those processes and procedures. So very much asking yourself about, what do we now need to do differently? This is the way we've always done it, is not necessarily the answer now. It is, what do we need to do now? How do we need to work better together? Where do we need to be collaborating? I have a fundamental view as a CEO of my own organization that single companies will not be able to give single solutions anymore. I think there will be a better place for innovation, collaboration, best of breed, those companies who can work together end to end at a cost-effective price, and who understand global and local, and then can share experiences and bring them to the table. And by the way, that is two-way. So it's easier India to Europe or the US, and Europe to and US to India. It's two-way. It's not one way. And everybody needs to learn and adapt. And I think it's really, really important that I thought that was such a great saying or statement, especially now, that I wanted to share that with you. So what does this all mean at the end of the day? You know, I talk about business strategy, I talk about the importance of partnership, the time to unlearn and relearn. You know, ultimately, when you're doing implementation, change, strategy, and execution, there are 5 key points here that I would ask you to continue to think about every day. And it also applies to your career. It also applies what you're doing in your day job. It also applies to your studies. It also applies to what the professor is telling you, etc., etc. So it's that you understand challenges. What do you bring to the table? How will you work with them? that your idea is simple, clear, and understandable, and that your value for money. So, so important. Those principles over 30 years, I have learned through bitter experience and fantastic experience. But I can assure you, having to have been learned and have to learn the hard way and have the scars to show it is so, so important, because you can't put a price on experience. You cannot. But also in this day and age, the ultimate idea is you use your experience, you use the energy of the millennium generation, you use that global experience. Together, we will get to a better place. And that's when I talk about collaboration networks. But what are you trying to do is ultimately help clients or yourself achieve real, impactful and positive change, either to them or for yourself, or what you're trying to do for your families and their underlying clients too. Because when strategy is put out and when me as an organization is asked to come in, you know, you want that impact to be positive, not negative. Yes, there may be organizations in a post-COVID world where there'll be cost restructuring and re-platforming, but that's also change, and it should be seen as an opportunity, but not a threat. Sid? I'm not going to go through all of these. You will see it on the deck. What I'm trying to say here is when you talk to people, you need to be able to show an evidence that you've done this before, or you've worked in certain areas, and what it was and what it was about. So if I look at in my world, we'll talk about product, fund products, client experience, resourcing. It's always important for a client to feel very comfortable and ultimately of the knowledge and understanding that you have previous experience, because it counts and it's important, especially in my job. And also give them testimonials, give them reference sites. Say, okay, go and speak to these people, go and speak to these people about my work. If you don't like me, if you don't believe me, speak to them. Very, very important. As a final thought, I've always said this to people and I thought I'd share it here. Ultimately, as a final thought of what I'm saying here, with all of strategy, with all of change, you are in control when you're driving it. It's easy to tell yourself that you can't do something well. It's said in the world of financial services, learned helplessness. You've taught yourself to be average, right? Don't do that. I came up with this line many years ago saying, winners make it happen, losers let it happen. So whenever you do, whatever you do in your life, for your work-life balance, your mental well-being, what you do and try and drive for at the end of the day is ultimately down to you on how successful that will be. And I've said in many, many interviews for C-suites downwards over my career, this role is as much or as little as you want it to be. Ultimately, it's as much as little as you want it to be. You drive it, you put in the energy, what you put in is what you get out. If you want to let it happen and shrug your shoulders and say, oh, it's difficult, then maybe you shouldn't have done the role in the first place. Maybe you shouldn't have taken on the challenge. But in change, and when you're looking at business strategy to business implementation, execution, and that strategy, you've got to make it happen. If you let it happen, you will fail. So on that point, I would just say, I'm going to sign off on that for my conversation because I'm conscious of time, and I think I've about kept time, Professor, but more than happy to take any questions or thoughts that you may have. And I hope that you found that a little bit useful. There's just one last slide here that just talks about ComSol and what we actually do in our space. I'm not going to do that now. I'm not here to sell ComSol. I'm here to share my experience and knowledge. So, Professor, over to you.
Thanks a lot, Steve. It was wonderful. And if I can summarize, you talked about the integrity, you know, how individual integrity, the person's integrity is most important thing. You talked about connect with people, you know, how it helps. You may not have all the resources, you may not have all the knowledge, but the knowledge of your friends, your colleagues, your partners, that becomes very important, and complete solution can be given if you can bring in the knowledge of your entire team together. You talked about understanding oneself, yourself maybe, that's very important. You should know what are your strengths and weaknesses. That becomes very important. And also that of clients, what is it that client needs? sometimes and quite often people forget what client wants and they want to deliver what they want to give or what they have. I personally, I liked what you talked about India as such as a country. It's very important to reflect on ourselves to understand where we go wrong. And that slide for me was most important as to how maybe from outside people see India. Very important for us to reflect, very important for us to invest in training and development, very important for us to think in long term rather than short term, very important for us to think many times in top line rather than saving costs. That's very important. How to increase market share, maybe how to increase revenue, maybe we should look there, and maybe increase profit. Don't look at cost necessarily. Maybe spending a little more may help you to earn more revenue, maybe more profits. Very important. And the last slide also was very, very interesting. Winners make it happen. Because, that was really very interesting. Thanks a lot, Steve. We'll take some questions. I hope you have time to take questions.
Sure, I'll happily take the quick. I'll do my best to answer them.
Sure. So there is a question from Manas Mehrotra, who has asked a question in chat, and he says, in a world where exclusivity is increasingly becoming a misnomer, is it advisable to ensure full knowledge transfer to clients and risk redundancy to losing own IP to competition? It's there in chat also, but I have read it for you.
I think my answer to that is that you're never going to tell everybody everything you know, unless they want to become, unless you're training them to be someone who you want to take on or someone that you want to train. However, transferring of IP where it's relevant to a client is very, very important, because, there was an analogy in the old days called knowledge is power. And that's a very, very, very bad place. It's very dark and it's very selfish. What it's about is you're not going to lose what you do in credibility because you'll be seen as a partner. You'll be seen as trusted, and you will share your experiences and share your knowledge, and you will share and make sure when you've done something to help make change happen, you're leaving them with the book of how to do it. You don't want to be doing something where you keep coming back, because what that gives to the client is an impression of bad execution and bad management. So exclusivity, I can understand it in some sectors, I get it, but equally at the same time, I would say when you're doing things like helping a business grow or shape, it is very important that you impart that knowledge to help them get there at the same time. So yes, do share it, but at the same time, I would just re-emphasize where relevant.
Thanks, Steve. There is a question from Sanjay Garg. He says, when the house is on fire and smoke and pandemonium is all around, can leadership focus on long-term strategy or structural issues?
I think that's a great question, and thank you very much for that. My answer is it has to be both. We're seeing it right now in COVID. You have organizations that my team are working on right now, as are the many firms, where people are worrying about today, what we need to do today, the fact that everybody's working from home in very unprecedented situations. However, you've got to look at the long-term venture of the business, because it's not going to survive on the short-term issues of COVID. It's got to still look beyond it. It has to do that. The executives need to look at that. People will be looking at socio-economic plans. They'll be looking at stimulus packages. In my world, in financial services, they'd be looking at liquidity stress testing the market. They have to look through. So yes, when the house is burning, yes, you need to put the fire out. And that is in short-term management and being very objective and very skilled and organized about that, to make sure that you can run the bank, as well, using my language. But you still have to, in a post-COVID world, build the bank again. So you can't do one. They're interlinked. You can't do one without the other. If you're not keeping the lights on now, then there will be nothing to build. But if you keep the lights on, you need to know what your competitors are doing, what governments and economies and continents are doing, and countries. So you have to think of both.
Dear friends, I am avoiding questions which require discussion about specific sectors, for example, retail or textile, because they are very specific questions and they have to be answered in that particular context. So I am taking questions which are at a generalized level rather than in a specific level. I will take some live questions, Steve. I would request Shrey, Anurag, and Georgie to come online and ask their questions. Shrey, please come online and ask your question. Shrey, if you would. And Anurag and Georgie, please come online. Shrey, you may start. Else you can at least unmute yourself and ask your question, please. Okay. So meanwhile, Shrey, by the time, yeah, Anurag is online. Anurag, please ask your question. You are on mute, Anurag. Anurag, you are on mute. Please unmute yourself and ask question. Anurag, you are on mute. Please unmute yourself and ask your question.
He's asking you to unmute him.
Yes. Okay. Let me ask a question then, which is written in the chat box from Mohit. Mohit is asking, are we making strategies to increase market share, or are we making strategies to solve problems?
Well, in the competitive world, if I could talk about my industry, and I think it's probably applicable to most industries, there'll be those organizations who will be looking to acquire and grow their market share through either through acquisition or can you still hear me?
Yes, yes, you're audible.
Yeah, sorry. So there'll be companies who'll be looking to gain their market share. They'll be doing that through either organic growth, acquisition, or failure, or other business failing. There will be a situation where ultimately companies will need to think very clearly about what those strategies are, and there will be cases where companies will collapse. You know, I know that the big banks, for certain, will be looking for mergers and acquisitions to go on. You know, the investment bankers are rubbing their hands with that for thinking of all the money they'll take for that. But at the same time, there are companies who are singing, well, what is our position going to be in the future? So in trying to answer the question, I think market share of bigger companies will certainly expand. Do I think that gives issues to commissions like we have in the UK, like monopoly and mergers commissions? They say there's no competition anymore. Yes, I think it will play that. But what I'm also hoping out of over in a post-COVID world, excuse me, is that people will also realise that there's real importance for the small and mid-tier organisations who can bring that extra value rather than just a corporate mindset to the table. So I'm seeing that already. I mentioned it in my talk about being best in class and leverage that. I think that will come as well. But definitely in merger and acquisition, definitely companies will fail. We're seeing it in companies in the UK, some old, very retail businesses. Airline businesses are all going to struggle, and there'll be companies there, whether they be venture capital, private equity companies, who look to buy these airlines up, whether that's Air France, British Airways, or whoever it may be, Lufthansa in Germany. They'll be looking to buy them and looking to try and make money from it.
Thanks. Anurag?
Steve, referring to your quote that we need to learn, unlearn, and relearn in the 21st century, given the current scenario, what does the industry need to unlearn and then relearn going forward?
That's a great question, and thank you very much for that. And my answer to that at very high level would be, just because we did it like we did it before doesn't mean we're going to do it the same again. So whatever you have been taught before and whatever you think before, where a society and a global pandemic is asking us all to adapt and change, you're going to have to learn to leave some of that behind and teach yourself what a new world looks like. And I think that is, and so the unlearn piece to your question would be possibilities of elements of life that you have learned in your industry and your career that may not be relevant anymore, because you may work from home for the rest of your days. You know, team meetings and hot desking may be things of the past, or probably will be. Going to see clients is going to be a very different world. You know, relearn is So how do we do that now? How do I be as effective as I was before, or even potentially more effective? Because COVID has given us an opportunity to be smarter. And and ultimately, it's also looking at, you know, as companies, on how you work the smartest you can be in a very different environment. And I can tell you now, relearn will be, I know big banks are looking at their real estate footprints across the globe. Do I need 12,000 people in London anymore when they've all been working from home? Probably not. Do I need to, you know, my cost of doing business, do I need my staff all in London anymore? No, you know, that we should follow up with the Mumbai, Pune, Hyderabad conversations even further. We should start, and those conversations literally in my industry are happening now, by the way, they are happening. Where does that location strategy take us? You know, is there going to be an overload for India? Should Shanghai and Manila be looked at as other location centers? What is India going to bring to the table? Which is a really interesting point that you've reminded me to say, so thank you for the question, is for India also needs to show innovation back. Innovation doesn't just come from Silicon Valley, it comes from up here in all our heads. And from an Indian perspective, as well as any other country, to be honest, show that innovation back. So relearn, I would say, in this context, is show why you're good at what you do. Show, because companies, if they're moving more stuff out and downsizing their footprints around the world and giving it to you, will then look to you to say, well, how can we do these things smarter then? The question's going to reverse, I think, over time. Does that answer your question?
It does. It does quite a lot, and it's a little forward-looking. For the time being, what I'm relearning is how to make wine at home, because we aren't getting...
I think that's a great plan.
And I would like to follow that up with one more question, which a colleague of mine had just asked. That in India, PM has given a slogan of Atmanirbhar. So what is the perception about that in terms of learning and perception there? How is it being perceived in Europe and Western markets?
Anurag, you have to translate Atmanirbhar for Steve. I don't know, Steve, how would you...
Oh, I'm sorry for that. Yeah. Atmanirbhar is basically self-reliant. Okay. So he is given a motto.
I think, yeah, okay. So yeah, I think I'll answer this the right way for you, is that self-efficiency, self-starting, innovation, be able to work on one's own, be able to work from home effectively, to be trusted, to be self-reliant, looking to organizations to support you, whether that's in office space, computer equipment, whatever it may be, telephones, webinars, or whatever it may be, LinkedIn, you know, is very, very important. So I think, you know, self-efficiency as the world comes to learn that not everybody's going to be in an office every day and they're going to be at home, you're going to have to learn how to get people's time where you would walk up to their desk before and say hi. You can't do that anymore. So currently anyway. So it may be, so I have to get hold of them. So how do I get hold of them? I'll put them in a meeting. So then you look at my diary and saying everybody wants a meeting with Steve. I need 36 hours in a day. So because there's just not enough time to talk to everybody because they're all making meeting appointments. So then you have to think a little bit differently about how do you do that? Well, we'll have a team meeting. We'll do a catch-all once a week, or, you know, it's all about thinking differently and also thinking about the other person too. How are they trying to work? Not just about you, but think about how we say over here, treat someone how you'd like to be treated yourself. So think about that, and think about when they say you have to be more self-starting, yes, but think of all the ideas that you may have and how that pushes down to others could also give a problem. So you've got to balance it and understand, and that whole point around communication is absolutely key now more than it's ever been, I would think.
Steve, somehow your video has been frozen. If you can maybe switch off video once and then restart. Meanwhile, Georgie, can you come online and ask your question, please?
Am I back?
Good evening.
Fine, Steve. Yeah. Georgie, please.
Hi, good evening, sir. Hi. So, what will be the marketing strategies for the hospitality industry as post COVID-19? What will be the marketing strategy for the hospital industry? Because it has been seen that the hotels are running out of guests and the occupancy percentage has gone down to a very low level. And how do we come out of it?
Steve, would you like to answer this? Because as I said,
I am not. I'll firstly say I don't work in that industry, but I'm not trying to deflect the answer. What I'm trying to say is that I think it's going to be like any other industry. We've noticed if we look through COVID, the lack of protective equipment, the lack of testing, which I know is going up, but the lack of a vaccine, and you look at all that stuff. But I think that industry, and then you look at the retail industry, it's really going to be stimulus package driven, I think, and distancing rules understood. So do we all stay 2 meters apart anymore, or can we go on holiday together? Will the beaches be open? But until I think, I could say your guess is as good as mine as a very top line answer, but I think we have to lean towards the governments of this world, of what people are doing and taking the lead. Don't blame them for what they're doing, because ultimately they've never been in this situation either. So everybody's trying to do the best they can. But if you look at New Zealand today, they've declared that they're COVID free. So they're starting to play rugby again, and they're starting to get life back together again. So you can see if organizations and countries and areas of the world, whether that's Asia Pacific, IIMA, United States, wherever, start getting a proper handle and doing this properly, then things will start to come back. But governments, ultimately, whichever industry's in, everybody's had to lay off staff, everybody's had to stop staff working, companies have gotten broken and bust, but it depends what those economic plans will be and the stimulus packages that are offered, which will ultimately determine, alongside a COVID vaccine or testing that gets people to feel more comfortable, will drive the outcomes of what that looks like. I think it's too early to say is my real answer. It genuinely is too early to say.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you.
Steve, we'll take 2 more questions. Shivani, please ask your question.
Yes, I hope I'm audible.
Yes, Shivani, please go ahead.
Yeah. Hi, Steve. Thank you so much.
Shivani.
That was a very insightful session. My question to you is that while we are seeing that because of the COVID, so many people are going out of businesses, and so many governments are actually focusing more on how to bring them back and helping them from the supply side by easy credits or so many financial help that they're giving. Are we going to see a shift from a demand-led supply to a supply-led demand industry post-COVID?
I think we're going to see a world of less competition, less companies. I could just take an example. Here in the UK, there was a 1.5 mile queue to get to McDonald's on Friday. I mean, so supply and demand is always going to be there. But I do think ultimately we are going to be in a situation where, depending what industry it's in, whether you're the airline, travel, retail, financial services, construction, health service, etc., I think each will be very different. I think financial services the area I'm in, talking about that specifically, will continue to grow. People look at alternative asset classes and move away from traditional. We're seeing that already. Think about green funds and social responsibility and all that good stuff, which they should have been doing many years ago. But anyway, that's another matter. Whereas you're looking at the demand in healthcare is going to need to be looked at very differently. People say, England's very fortunate to have a health service. The US, you pay for everything. India, it depends where you go. It's all debate. But I think each government needs to look at this, because there will be another pandemic. There's no question about it. In my personal view, something somewhere will happen again. And, it's all about, very sadly, but I do think, trying to get to answering your question fully, I do think there will be higher demands for certain aspects. There'll be low or no demand for something that's not relevant anymore. We see, big superstores in the UK have been around for 150 years, just shut. Amazon will take over the world, I think.
True. Thank you so much.
I hope that some way goes in answer. It's a difficult question to answer, but I do think there'll be higher demand in some places and low, if not no demand in others.
Sure. Thank you so much.
If there are three good questions, so I won't let you go a bit easily. We have Nirav on screen, Nirav and Dhaval, and I think Nisha was also there. But Dhaval, you can start with your question and then followed by Nirav, and I will find where Nisha is right now.
Hi, Steve. So one of my customer is facing, a very typical COVID-related situation. He's a manufacturing of, one of the, say, pesticides and agriculture-related fertilizer company. So his typical concern is that there are some customers or say the dealers who have already to whom they have delivered the goods, and the fund is lying there because the farmers has not paid them back, and some of the raw material suppliers are demanding money from them. So he is the kind of a person who is very ethical, and he is facing difficulties that the funds is lying in the market and somebody is demanding. So he was just trying to get some help from me that how to get out of this in this current scenario, which strategies we need to.
I think it's a great question, and I think we're seeing that globally. We have similar challenges where there are crops in the fields, but there's nobody to pick them because nobody wants to come here and nobody's going to pay them. And this again will come back to, well, there's an element of trust, but people have got to live. People got to earn money. There's a very basic principle here. But also, again, I'll come back to what is the stimulus packages that are going to be offered? What is the longer term view to get people back on their feet? Because you still need the farmers, you still got to move the crop, you still got to fertilize it. People still got to eat. So ultimately, it's going to require some different thinking to how what we call over here kickstarting industries into getting them going again, but on the knowledge that they're going to need money to do that, but also on the knowledge that the support is there when they're finding it's hardest. And we see it here and across Europe and into, I can't speak so much about the US, but definitely in Europe, there is the balance of when do people go back to work with a virus that's not yet contained, and a chain of events where companies are no longer working because they've been told not to, versus stay at home and do nothing and the government will try and help you. It's a very difficult one. And I guess the answer would be is that he needs to speak to friends, colleagues, networks, try and understand what other people are doing in a similar situation, trying to get answers, speak to his local government representatives about what can and cannot be done. It's very difficult. And, I wish I could flip my fingers and say, here's a magic dust and everything goes away, but sadly it doesn't. And I don't think there is a straight answer for any of this other than have belief in yourself, make it happen, don't let it happen, be determined, be innovative, try and find different ways, very much to what I was talking about earlier. Talk to different people, get different opinions, collaborate. Maybe there's another person there who is getting their deliveries done. So work with them to see what can be done. There's stuff like that. I don't think somebody's going to come here and say, here's a check, carry on. That's not going to happen anywhere in the world.
They have to pay the rent, they have to pay the wages, and the inflow is not there.
Exactly.
Blocked.
Well, there was, I'll just share this with you, and it's a great point. 80% of all rental accommodation in the UK is now in arrears. 80%. So 80% of people are not up to date on their rent. That came out on BBC News this morning. All I'm trying to say is you're not on your own. Everybody's feeling it. There's no exception. There is no exception. A virus does not make a choice.
Steve, Disha, it was not Nisha, it was Disha. I am extremely sorry.
Thank you, Steve, for your insight.
Disha has a question and I will modify a little bit. She says self-sufficiency and reliance in terms of homegrown product sales and production. What could be the impact according to you? And I modify this as, if all countries talk about self-sufficiency and self-reliance, what will happen to international trade?
I think quite honestly, international trade will continue, maybe just in a varying theme, because the UK still likes to eat bananas, and it still likes to have, I don't know, ugly fruit or whatever, and it still likes New Zealand lamb and all the rest of it, and of course Indian curries go without saying. But you know, at the end of the day, international trade will happen, probably with less people, and probably with less activity than we've seen pre-COVID. I think self-sufficiency will be there, but it will only work in the spheres of what can be, if you take it in from a crop point of view, it can only what can actually grow there properly itself. So there has to be a practical element to it. World trade is so intertwined over many, many years of global trading and expansion, then bringing in Brazil, Russia, India, China as these new economies starting to build out. It's not going to switch off. And yes, there will be a set element of self-sufficiency, but I also think human nature is one that's inquisitive, and one that will still want to spend time in other parts of the world, will still want to travel. I'm not going to sit in my house for the next 500 years. I don't plan on doing that. But at the same time, I think once testing is clear, once a vaccine is found, hopefully, then a lot of this will change again. But self-sufficiency will put down demand on certain elements, for sure.
Last question, Nirav, please ask your question. Nirav.
Hi, Steve. Thank you very much for such an insightful session. I just have one question. These days, innovation-driven environment is getting very difficult. If you see, corporates are getting too much focused on results, and innovation or new idea acceptance is not really getting accepted. So what suggestions would you give to create an environment or a culture which is innovation friendly?
That's a great question, and thank you very much for that. And that's one challenge I've had to face with my colleagues in my organization Beyond for many, many years. It's my answer will be is there's going to be two reasons why people are going to want to think differently and take on innovation. I come back to COVID again, sadly, but about thinking differently, the need for driving fintech strategies, the need for thinking about how you do things differently will have to happen. I think what big organizations have learned, that return on investment figures or margin figures of 40-50% that need to be driven. Those are financial services targets that are talked about. I'm using there as an example. Investment on people and in infrastructure was missing. I know one company, for example, where they will have to relearn, unlearn and relearn, is a bank who everybody had to work from home, but they had no laptops or no means of communicating. And this is a major global bank, right? So business continuity strategy is going to have to be thought differently. How people work are going to be thought differently. Companies won't have a choice. If they carry on as they are, their expense ratio will go off the scale. They will be downgraded as how they viewed it as a stable bet for investors. And ultimately, others, their competition, are going to do it. So I think there are questions out there now, and part of what I do now is talking about what does a post-COVID world look like? What does innovation look like? You know, where do you want to be? You have some very smart people, leverage them. And I think, and it's not going to be in every case, of course not, but I think at the end of the day, you will see a shift for people understanding that they have to work differently, whether that's location, whether that's people, whether that's technology. They're going to have to think. I don't think they've got a choice if they want to survive. I don't think they can. And, you know, I would have faith in that statement. I would stand by it. And the skills that you bring to the table and sort of things I've discussed about here today, and apply some of that, there'll be companies that are going to want to listen. And frankly, those who don't want to listen, good luck.
Thank you, Steve. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot once again for coming in our webinar series. Just to share with you, 9,500 people had registered on Facebook and around 6,500 saw it live. 300 of them at peak were there on Zoom also. So that takes in our series an all-time high. Also, let me thank let me thank Siddharth Karmarkar. Siddharth, please come online. Thanks. Yeah, you are there. Thanks to Siddharth Karmarkar. Siddharth was actually taking us through all the slides. Thanks to Siddharth for introducing me to Steve. Steve, it has been a pleasure knowing you. And I wish at some point of time I do boating with you in England. Preferable. I would come there other than you're coming to India.
Very welcome. I'll just say one last thing. I saw a number of questions come up saying, what's CAS on the slide? I'll just answer that. That's client money rules. So that's money laundering. Okay. It's all about protecting client money from bank money. It's an interesting thing.
Thanks a lot, Steve. Thank you. Thanks to
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, and
Thank
everybody
you,
have a
Professor
great
Verma.
day.
Thank you very much for setting this all
Thank
up.
you, Sanjay sir. Thank you so much.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Siddharth, for making it happen.
Thank you, Sanjay. Thank you. A pleasure.
Thank you.
I would request Professor, Professor to, if we can have all the questions, then after this session gets over, Steve and I can look at those questions and give the answers back. Is that possible, sir?
Yes, I will download the chat and I will send all the questions to you.
Okay, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, sir. Bye-bye.
Thank you,
Thanks
Steve.
a lot,
Thank you,
Steve.
sir.
Thanks
Thank
for
you,
joining
sir.
in.
Yeah. Thank you, Siddharth. Thank you.
Siddharth. Thank you, Steve.
Thanks.